So UFC 325 is this weekend, and it looks like we have another good one on our hands, ladies and gentlemen. Two back-to-back numbered cards, right, one after the other, which is a bit rare for UFC in recent times. However, we're still starting off the year, and it is still the intro of that Paramount era. So they're trying to put on a good show, and we have a banger main event, even though it's not the one that most of us wanted. I'm going to get into my breakdowns, starting with the early prelim, ending with the main card, and just giving my thoughts and opinions on how I think these matchups will turn out. We'll begin with the early prelim opener of Aaron Tall versus Namzrai Batbayar. In my opinion, I think Batbayar gets this one. And I know the tattooed on beard might inspire a lot of faith in Aaron Tall. But just for the skill set for both debutants, I think Bat Bayar is simply just the better equipped for this one. I think he has better well-roundedness, more capability of finishing the fight, as long as he plays it strategic enough. I think overall it should be a great debut for him. Moving on, we have Solon Grangbo versus Lawrence Louis. I think this one is going to be a bit more competitive than the previous fight. However, I am leaning towards Lawrence Louis. I'm not super duper familiar with both of them in the instance that I would completely stake my house on my pick. However, just based on what I've seen from them both, Lawrence Louis looks like the more likely to win this matchup. I think just capability-wise, I think that he's probably going to be better able to grit it out. I think that he will be able to end it by decision, as I expect this to be a bit more back and forth between the two. Moving on to the next matchup. We have Kenichiro Nakamura versus the Sebastians Zalay. Forgive me for butchering their names a bit. This one, I'm actually going to lean towards Kenichiro. I know that this is going to be an Australian heavy card. However, I just don't really see Zalay being the one to pull this one through. I know you want to root for the home team, but just matchup and stylistic wise, I think Nakamura would actually be capable of finishing this fight, especially being the second card of the year and the second card on Paramount. I think both fighters are going to come out a bit aggressive. I think Nakamura is technically the better fighter. I think he'll be able to put together his combinations a bit better. I actually think that his striking will be the differentiator in this matchup. I think he'll really be able to pull apart, and I'm saying probably a second round finish in this one, possibly third. But I just see Zalay kind of getting caught within this matchup. Moving on. And I know we're kind of speeding through these early prelims. However, we have a lot of debutantes on this card. So it's going to be an interesting way to get a lot of new blood into the UFC. Speaking of debutantes, we now have Sang-Wook Kim versus Damar Fan. In this one, this should be a pretty fun matchup as well. We have Sang-Wook Kim, his specialty, his capabilities. More or less, he's going to have a good striking game that will probably, when I say a good striking game, I'm not talking good in the aspect of this is Izzy coming 2.0. However, he has very solid fundamentals, very accurate, but once again, when things get a little bit pressurized, gets a little bit ahead of himself. But then we have Damar Fan as well. Damar Fan, in this matchup, I don't really see him pulling through. I'm actually leaning towards Sang-Wook Kim in this choice. Once again, it's not another matchup that I would say 100%. But as I said, even though I believe Sang-Wook Kim can kind of get ahead of himself a bit, I do think that he has the technical capability necessary to kind of pull through this one. I'm expecting this fight to get a bit sloppy just because of the nature of how I see the two fitting against each other. But I do believe Samu King will be able to pull this one through by decision. Moving on, we have Khan Ofli versus Yiza. This is going to be a bit more experienced fight between the two. As you can see in their records, both fighters have been kind of in and around town when it comes to the fighting game a bit. However, I think Yiza wins this one. Yiza can be a bit reckless. So there's a bit of a concern of mine that he might get a little bit too overzealous and get caught with something. But I do believe that Yiza is fully capable of being the more aggressive fighter while also not being too reckless. Also maintaining his focus, buckling down, pushing forward, and getting it done. I think Yiza actually gets a knockout in this one. I say first or second round knockout. Now it's a bit early, especially with me saying that there is the risk of him being reckless. But I think that with Yiza, he's either going to get the finish early or he might get finished early. And I don't think he'd get finished by Ofli, even though Ofli is a very solid fighter. I just think Yiza gets this one done. Moving on, we have Jonathan Mikhailov versus Oban Elliott. I know Elliott is coming off a loss, but for anyone who saw that fight, Elliott did a pretty good job heart-wise, and I know Mikhailov has kind of been on a tear. Like, Mikhailov has been looking great recently, but despite saying that, I'm leaning towards Elliott. I think Elliott is a very capable fighter potential-wise. I know that for this one, Mikhailov is probably the favorite, for good reason. He's a very good fighter, very technically sound. But I think Oban Elliott is one of those fighters that is willing to make it dirty and to kind of really, really put his chin on the line to make something land. I think that's the type of grit and determination, as well as just strategic aspect that you need to overcome a fighter like Jonathan Mikhailov. Because I don't believe Oban Elliott is the more skilled fighter of the two. I think technique-wise, Jonathan Mikhailov is better. I think as well as fight IQ-wise, he's also better. But I do believe that Oban Elliott would be a lot more willing to engage, get in pocket a lot more, engage with that dirty boxing a bit, but really just making the fight ugly. Like, really willing to risk being finished to get the finish. Because of all of that, I think Oban Elliott wins this by decision, ironically. I expect it to be a bit of a high-paced fight. I think Jonathan Mikhailov is cerebral enough to not get finished by Elliott, or at the very least be defensively sound enough to prevent that from happening. However, I think Elliott is going to be able to do enough to kind of clearly win the fight in the eyes of the judges and the fans. Moving on, we have Jacob Malkoun versus Torres Finney. In this one, I'm going to just go with the obvious answer, which is Torres Finney. I think in this middleweight bout, Finney's basically I think he's the bigger puncher, to be honest. I don't think it's really that big of a skill gap between the two. I think Finney has more power when you put that together as well. And in a matchup where I think both of them are similar skilled, I'm going to go with the fighter who has a bit more in one category that I feel like could pull him ahead a bit. And in this case, I think Finney just has a little bit more power that's going to be able to lean out of that competition a bit more to really be the differentiator in the accumulative match. And speaking of accumulative, see it being a bit of a grind between the two. And then I think in the third round, Finney lands a finish. To be simple, I think just they'll be very back and forth, and I think that Finney is just going to be able to go harder for longer and eventually find his moment and or create his moment once it gets to around the third round. Moving on, we have Cam Rouston. Versus Cody Brundage. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not picking Cody Brundage. I enjoyed Cam Ralston's debut. I understand that he's one of the guys who's training with Izzy right now. So even though, and you definitely can see that this is home team for him, I think he's going to be hyped up. I think that he has just the good quality partners to train with. I think that he's training with somebody who also has very high level takedown defense. At the very least, he can get great guidance, not from Izzy to Volk. I just think that overall, Cam Ralston has all the attributes he needs for Cody Brandage's wrestling to not really make a difference. And as awkward as and the kind of unusual as Ralston may look while fighting specifically, I just don't think Cody Brandage's skill level is that high. He's kind of a perpetual journeyman, so to speak. I just don't see him presenting enough factors to Ralston as long as Ralston doesn't get sloppy. I think Ralston finds a finish in the second round. To be honest, I expect the first round to be a bit of a feeling out period, and then Ralston just understanding his habits, his timings, really just dealing with some of that initial charge that Brundage does sometimes, where he's kind of tries to empty the gas tank as swiftly as possible to try to overwhelm you, and if that fails, then he kind of fades for as the fight goes on further and further, and I expect Ralston to capitalize on that and just get him out of there within the second. Moving on, we have someone we haven't seen in a little while in Junior Tafa versus Billy Elikana. If I'm remembering correctly, I think his brother was cut from the UFC. If I remember, I think they cut Justin. However, in this matchup, Junior Tafa, one of those fighters that, like, he's always willing to fight. He just doesn't always win the fight. You feel me? It makes it. He's kind of the. How do I say? He has a bit of that Volkanovski mentality in the aspect of, and relax, like I'm not disrespecting Volk, but he has a bit of that Volkanovski mentality in anybody, anywhere. But in that same aspect, he has the same mentality of, even if I'm not prepared, I'll still take on anybody, anywhere. Kind of puts himself at disadvantages. A lot of times he'll take short notices all the time and kind of get put away badly. I don't think he's anywhere near Billy Elikana's level. I'm not going to lie to you. I think Elikana is just overwhelmingly better than him. I think Elikana is more disciplined. I think Elikana is more skilled. I think Elikana is more experienced. I think Elikana has more intentionality as far as how he executes his game plan. And then I think Elikana just overall has a higher fight IQ as well. Sometimes you watch Junior Tafa fight and it looks like just a guy at the bar brawling. Whereas like Billy Elikana is an actual martial artist. How I see this, I say Billy Elikana first or second round by whatever he wants. Whether it's a knockout or a submission, I just expect Billy Elikana to like get him out of there by the second. I'd personally be surprised if it went past the second round, and I'd definitely be surprised if Elikana lost. I think that this is just one of those clear-cut. I think this is one of the most clear-cut matchups on this entire card. Moving on, we have officially gotten to the main event. They don't want to expand it, but we have Quillian Salkali. What's wrong with me? We have Quillian Salkali versus Jamie Mularkey. Salkhalid? Quillian Salkhalid. Like, that's a unique spelling. Versus Jamie Mularkey. Despite me butchering his name horrifically, I think Quillian Salkhalid gets it done. I think in this matchup, and we saw how that last fight went. I know Killen got him out of there too fast to really know how good Killen really is. But I just think Killen's striking is going to be a huge differentiator in this matchup against Jamie Mularkey. I think Killen also has solid takedown and grappling defense. And I also think Killen is able to like lock up a submission if necessary. I just think Killen is better everywhere, genuinely. I think he got the physical advantages in height and reach. I think he's got definitely the striking advantage, and I think that he's fully capable of keeping it within his arena. I think Killen basically overwhelms him and gets him out of there pretty swiftly. Let me not. I expect a first or a second round. I was going to say, let me not say a first round to give respect to Jamie Mullarkey, because Jamie Mullarkey is like a very solid competition for Killen, just as a proper pressure test because of how swiftly Killen overcame his last test. But I honestly think that Killen gets him out of there in the first or second round. Jamie Mullarkey is tough, so I wouldn't be surprised if it went on longer. I'm just not expecting it to go on longer. Moving on, we got Bam Bam. We got Tai Tuivasa versus Talison Teixeira. Now, before I go any further, I think I've said this multiple times before. For me, Talison Teixeira is one of the prospects in heavyweight that I have my eye on. I know that he lost to Derek Lewis in his last outing. However, I genuinely believe the reason for that loss was just him being a little bit overzealous in how he launched his offense. Said it before, I think that Derek Lewis's biggest element, or one of his greatest weapons, are his power and his unpredictability. And I think Talison Teixeira got a bit of both, where he just got hit at a completely unexpected moment and it just rocked him to a point he wasn't prepared for. I don't see that happening against Tai Tuivasa. I genuinely expect for Talison Teixeira to go in there, ragdoll Tai Tuivasa, and then Tai Tuivasa to retire. I don't see anywhere where Tuivasa would realistically be the favorite for this matchup. He's significantly shorter. He has less reach. While there's power, once again, everyone has power in heavyweight. I think Talison Teixeira is the significantly more aggressive pressure fighter, which could present an issue because he could get knocked out. However, after being beat by Derek Lewis, I'm expecting to After getting beat by Derek Lewis, I'm expecting Talison Teixeira to be a lot more cautious, at least initially, especially getting over those jitters in the beginning. And I think that in this matchup, he might play it by ear a bit in like that initial minute, maybe the first 2 to 3 minutes. But after that, if he doesn't already, I'm expecting Talison to just properly gauge his reach and his actual distance, see how Tai Tuivasa responds, and then just starch him. Like, I'm expecting him to get put down. Kind of like a faster paced version of Cortez Acosta versus Derek Lewis. That would probably be my expectations. Genuinely, just a faster paced version of that fight that we had last week of Derek Lewis and Waldo Cortez Acosta. I think Talison Teixeira puts him down in the first two. And if I'm being sincere with myself, I'm expecting him to get him out there in the first. And while I like Tai Tuivasa as much as anybody else, like at least in his prime, very, very entertaining fighter. And once again, home crowd guy. But God, do I hate when he spits in that fucking shoe and drinks that shit. That shit is some of the most... I don't care what anybody say. That is some of the most disgusting shit ever. When you have somebody else spit in the shoe and then you pour beer in it and you drink. Oh my God, that is appalling. That's abhorrent behavior. But yeah, I think that this is Tuivasa's retirement night. I really do. It's a perfect opportunity for it to. Honestly, I think if Tuivasa somehow wins, he should still retire. You got the home crowd. You're going against a young upper-corner. You're going against a young up-and-comer. If you beat him, end on a high note. And if he starches you, take that as a goodbye message. Like, take that as a state of what the current events are and quit while you're behind. Moving on, we have Rafael Fiziev versus Mauricio Hufi. This fight is quite interesting because we have Fiziev, who we saw him go to toe with Gaethje on two separate occasions, and we've seen Gaethje absolutely starch Paddy Pimblett throughout those 5 rounds in that last fight last week. So we know Fiziev's toughness. We also saw Fiziev have a very competitive matchup against Mateus Gamrot until that got cancelled. But, well, until the injury. But, once again, we're now going against a different opponent. And Fiziev has constantly been somebody who pushed himself. I'm happy to see him getting all these fights now, because I remember there was a period where he was trying very hard and everyone was avoiding him. Now we have Mauricio Hufi, incredible striker, phenomenal member of the Fighting Nerds. We just saw Gene Silva fight last week. But we also saw when Fiziev went against our boy, Benoit Saint Denis, he kind of just got steamrolled and finished. And that grappling is an aspect that Fiziev does have in his game. It's not his mainstay, but it is something that he can utilize. Once again, we saw him go against Gamrot and do decent prior to it being ended early. I genuinely don't know how to pick this one, because this fight could go one of two ways. It could go Fiziev being somebody who loves to engage in the pocket. Fiziev loves to strike. Like, he's always willing to engage. He gets close, he gets in it. Like, he will risk to make it work. The issue is, I don't think Fiziev is in any way, shape, or form a better striker than Huffy. And I don't think he's durable enough to just wither his properly landed hits. So I think if Fiziev does what he usually does as far as in the paint and throw it out, I think Huffy chins him. If Fiziev uses the entire array of his skills, I don't know how good are the improvements that Huffy has made on the grappling aspect. So I don't know if Fiziev won't kind of be able to just get through him regardless and get him out of there that way, or if Huffy has improved to the point that he could stifle something like that. We've seen fighters that didn't have good grappling improve unfairly swiftly before. We saw it with people like Pereira, for existence. And I know he's a bit of a freak himself, but so are a lot of these fighters. So somebody like Huffy, how good was his grappling recovery? He's in a team that a lot of people have some understanding of that, like a Kyle, or even people that have great grappling defense, like a Gene Silva, and like a Carlos Prates. What have they imparted on Huffy that could be the game changer with this? For me, I'm leaning towards Huffy. I am leaning towards Huffy. I think Fiziev will do what he usually does, try to strike it out. I think he might try to engage in the grappling a little bit. But if Huffy is just able to kind of delay that a bit, like, doesn't have to be full-on super-duper grappling or grappling defense, but enough to make Fiziev believe he's going to have to work for it a bit, I think that he'd be willing to engage after that. I think if he can just do that properly once or twice, then he can make it a striking battle, and I think he just has the advantage in that realm. However, once again, Fiziev isn't a dummy, and if he can see through those type of game plans, he'll completely take over. So we don't know, but I'm leaning towards Huffy. I think Huffy chins him. I think Huffy chins him in the third, because I think it'll take that long to properly, like, break him down and get the pace to what you'd like it to. It's really changed the mentality of Fiziev in this fight. And if Huffy's improvements aren't enough, and he didn't properly work on that grappling game, I think Fiziev is going to make an example out of him and try to make another run for that top 5. That's how I see it. I see Huffy getting it done in the third, but that's on the assumption that Huffy's made the necessary improvements in his grappling. Moving on, we have the man who quote unquote exposed Mauricio Huffy, Benoit Saint Denis, and then he's facing off against Dan Hooker. Now, as I'd mentioned, Mateus Gamrot as somebody who quote unquote like competed against Fazeev on high level grappling. But I think that in this matchup, we have Dan Hooker, who has beaten Gamrot, a high level grappler, a high level wrestler to be even more specific. And I think that is BSD's game. Benoit Saint Denis' game plan is charging, try to overwhelm, power you, try to strike you, try to push that aggressive like grappling just to get you to the ground and try to finish you with ground and pound. I don't think that strategy works well against somebody like Dan Hooker, who's been in there with the best of the best wrestlers. Even just now, we saw that he kind of got ran through by Armin Sarukian, to be honest. However, he still showed some good awareness of grappling defense, how to adjust, like kind of how to delay a bit. And I don't see Benoit Saint Denis as being close to the level of an Armin Sarukian. I think depending on how much Dan Hooker is able to stifle Benoit Saint Denis' wrestling, he just might be able to kind of win this as a battle of miles. Like each, or to be even more exact, a battle of inches, where he kind of just pulls away little by little, inch by inch in certain areas, like slow Saint Denis down enough. Saint Denis starts at a very, very high pace every time. Dan Hooker is able to kind of stifle that a bit, wither that storm. I think he's able to really get to him and take it over in the kind of latter half of the fight. I also think that Benoit Saint Denis doesn't have the striking capabilities to technically outstrike Dan Hooker. I don't think he's a better striker than him. I don't think he's a better kicker than him. However, I do think that he is a far more aggressive fighter, and he has the tools to implement and merge with that aggression in a way that could end up giving him quite a large advantage in this fight. And if Dan Hooker isn't able to weather that storm and or to alleviate it and delay it, then Hooker just might end up getting overwhelmed. This matchup, though, I think Dan Hooker gets it done. I think the goal and intention is for Dan Hooker to be the one to get it done. I think if Dan Hooker is able to beat Benoit Saint Denis, who is very clearly being pushed as the next, or at the very least, one of the next prospects for lightweight, alongside people like Fazeev, to be honest, I think if Dan Hooker is able to, quote unquote, fraud check him, or like really show a bit of a difference in separation in levels, then Hooker would be right up there again in the conversations for the next prospects in the division for a title opportunity. He'd still need a couple more wins, but he'd be a name that would be circulating again. Now, moving on, we have the main event, which is Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes 2. Let's start off by addressing the elephant in the room. No, Diego Lopes does not deserve to be fighting for this opportunity once more this soon. He is very clearly being pushed by the UFC. It is not fair. We have other contenders that should have gotten the opportunity. My personal opinion, I think the person who should be fighting for this title opportunity right now is Lerone Murphy. I think Lerone Murphy was the person who did enough to get this opportunity. If Gene Silva had beaten Diego Lopes, they would have immediately put him in there to fight against Volk. That was what the UFC was hoping for. Now, big fan of Gene Silva, say all the time. Whether or not he would have deserved it if he had beaten Lopes, that would have been debatable, but I probably would have leaned towards that he would have, just because of him constantly being so frequent and back and forth. The very last fight that Volkanovski had was against Diego Lopes. And while it was a competitive fight, it was very clear that Volk won. I think it's too soon to put them in there again. I think most fans agree. And a lot of people also would have liked to see Masvar in this fight. I also would love to see that. I think that was a fight that also Volk wanted, but the UFC was against it. And honestly, part of it is probably due to Mafzar's inactivity. Then we also had options like even an Aljamain Sterling to put in there, a former champion who's been looking pretty good in the division. And because of the UFC's bias against Aljo, he wasn't even considered for this. So we have quite a few other possible contenders that could have been there and should have been there inside Diego Lopes. No, don't don't think about Yair Rodriguez. I know a lot. I know some of you were thinking Yair just now. No, Yair doesn't deserve this opportunity. He hasn't done anything. He hasn't done enough in recent history to justify that. So like, kill those thoughts real quick. But to get to this fight though, how do I see this going? I think pretty similar to the last one. I think Volk kind of just outskills Diego over the course of 5 rounds and just ends up winning by decision in the end. However, and I noticed this with the last fight, and I know a lot of people were saying vintage Volk. Like in the Diego Lopes fight, I was concerned for Volkanovski throughout those entire 5 rounds because Volk is definitely older, and you saw it. He shook more. Like when Diego connected, and I know Diego connects crazy with everybody, but when Diego connected, Volk reacted very, very noticeably as well. There were a few times where it was clear that Volk was getting pushed back power wise and that he was a little bit slower to respond and that his timing was a little off. He's such an incredible and excellent mind in the sport, like not even just his skill, just his mind is so next level that despite some of those disadvantages, he still got it done. And that is so, so, so impressive. But I don't know if he can do it again. I think he can, but I don't know he can because Lopes is going to hit harder. Lopes is going to be more aggressive than he was early on in the previous fights. Lopes is going to try to push some of these things that he didn't do as well in this next opportunity. Lopes is very capable of winning. And if Lopes wins, it's going to be by brutal knockout. It's not going to be by decision. Because Volk is more skilled. Volk is more cerebral. Volk, if this goes 5 rounds, I promise you Volk is winning at least 3 of those rounds. But if Lopes wins, I don't think he goes 5 rounds. And I think if it makes it to these championship rounds again this time, Lopes will have bombs, knees, elbows, everything. And we've seen what Lopez's chin is made of in that Gene Silva fight. He can eat some shots. I don't think there's anything Volk can do to present the same quality of threat power-wise that Lopes brings to him. So Volk gonna have to know damn near be perfect to like make it to the end of that fight and win. This is gonna be a very interesting case. In my personal opinion, I really would like Volk to retire. And I'd like him to retire on top. I'd want Volkanovski to beat Lopes this last time and hang up the gloves. Because I don't think he beats anybody else that we're considering in the next outing. I think his best opportunity would be against Mafzar. And even then, I don't know if I pick Volk over Mafzar. I think Gene Silva beats Volk. At this stage in his career, I think Gene Silva beats Volk. At this stage in his career, I think Lerone Murphy might beat Volk. At this point in time, I see that Arman Sarukin's been talking about coming down. I think Sarukin beats Volk. I think in his prime, Volk beats all of them with no problem. Volk is not in his prime, though. He's noticeably slower. He's noticeably less durable. He's still the greatest featherweight of all time. And because he's the greatest featherweight of all time, he's able to perform at such a high level even now. But Father Time is undefeated, and those damages are adding up. Think that Volk put on another vintage performance against Diego and hang those gloves up. What do you guys think, though? That's just my opinion. These are my predictions. Tell me what y'all think. Get in the comment section. Holler at me. I appreciate all of y'all for seeing. Thank you very much. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.